Today I'm making a box full of box joints in 5 minutes. I'm starting with 4 pieces that are ripped to 3.5 inches. I want a box that's 10 by 8, so I'm going to cut my pieces into pairs, 10 inches and 8 inches. I like to use this box joint blade set. It's from Freud. It will give nice 1/4 inch finger joints. Now I'm not saying that it has to be this particular jig, much as I think it's a great jig. But as far as I'm concerned, it needs to be a jig that takes 4 boards at once. Cutting a practice piece first. You see, with a jig like this, there's only 2 cutting operations and then your box is done. I mean, you still have to add a bottom after that, but I mean all the box joints are done. I've got my 4 boards positioned and a backer board. They're all clamped into the jig and it is currently approaching 10:30. So let's get started. So that's half the joints cut, and it's been, like 3 minutes. Take the boards and I flip them over, and I still like to have the short ones in front. Now let's return the jig to its position. And verify that I've got the blade in the right spot. Back it up one more to move the front over, advance it 1 turn, slide those over, and now clamp it into position. Second cutting operation. So it's, 5 minutes, and that's even with, repositioning the camera. Yes, I do know my left and right. Ready for glue up and a bottom. So here's the big disclaimer. This is the only box joint jig I've ever used. I've never used one of those little pin type, the simple ones that everybody says it's so easy to make a box joint jig, and it is. I've seen lots of videos, it looks really easy, but I just look at them and I'm like, you're doing 1 cutting operation at a time, and then you flip it and do the other side. And then you got to do your next board, and then you got to do your next board, and then you got to do your next board. That's 8 cutting operations, whereas this is 2. So I enjoy the process of woodworking. It's my hobby. It's relaxing, it's fun, I like building things, but there's still a lot of goal-orientedness in me. So if I see a jig and it's like, well, that's going to take me 8 cutting operations, and I see a jig and it's like, well, that's only going to take me 2 cutting operations, I think that kind of jig is better. Now again, it doesn't have to be this particular jig, it's just that I'm talking about this type of jig, the type of jig where you can stack up 4 boards at a time. This is the Woodgears jig, designed by Matthias Wandel. I built it back in 2013. John Heiss has a very well-regarded jig. In some ways it looks simpler to this one. I've seen Stumpy Nubs has designed a number of them that are sort of playing off this type of idea. Other people have done it, Darben Orver, Drew Fisher. I've never tried any of those jigs. I've only tried this jig. It's just, the 4 at a time is what I'm talking about. Actually, scratch that. I mean 5 at a time. This was my test piece, and here's the one at the back, and there's all these blowouts. So if you can have a backer board that can take the blowouts, so here's my workpiece, has no blowouts on the back. Really nice and cut, and the blowouts are on the backer board. I actually want a divider down the middle of the box, so I'm going to put a few dados in while I still have the box jig installed. Make the height down. So much glue surface when you're doing fingers. And yeah, I got way too much glue in there. Don't really need much in way of clamping. I just want to make sure all the joints are tight. And let's make sure it's square. And just for paranoia, here we go. 12 7/8. 12 7/8. So I'm just going to leave that dry for an hour or so. So I cut a bottom to match. Put that on. I'm going to use the trim router to bring the base flush, and I've got this bearing guided bit which has just a bit of an inward angle so that the bottom will slope inward a bit. And a little sanding. And maybe a little bit more sanding to take down the fingers. Measure to fit the divider in. It looks like that's going to fit. Okay. I took this out to the garage and I sprayed it with some lacquer. Now I'm just giving it a quick burnish with some brown paper. This is leftover from a previous project, which in turn was salvaged. That's why it's got this brown stripe there. A little bit of quick burnishing, and now it just is a nice slick feel to it. So there's my box, and if you're curious, this is just going to be an organizer box for the cabinet that I built last time. Yeah, why would I make such a complicated thing when it's just going to be an organizer tray? And well, if you can make beautiful, accurate finger joints in like 5 minutes on a good jig, well, why not? And that was kind of the whole point of this video. So as always, thanks for stopping by. I hope you found something interesting. If you want to see some more, you might check out that video where I made, I think it was 148 or 184 fingers, I forget which. I made a really big box using the box joint jig. Or I'll also link to a video from several years ago where I went into a lot of the math for how you figure out how many times you're going to crank the crank on the jig. And, you know, I'll pull down the description because, you know, I've mentioned a lot of other people's box joints, and I'll link to those down below also. So thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.